to Why We Do What We Do. I am your demonic host, Abraham.
And I'm your potentially panicked host, Shane. Ooh.
We are a podcast, and today we're a satanic podcast. Just kidding, but we're kind of a satanic podcast.
I mean, kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, when we get into it, it's kind of are, actually.
Yeah, we'll find out more about it. And we're a psychology podcast either way. And we talk about the things that people and animals and other things do and why they do them and that sort of thing. And that's why I call the podcast Why We Do What We Do. And anyway, it is October, which means we are in the month of celebrating spooky things.
Yay! And the more I think about it, I would argue that because we are a psychology podcast, at least Scientologists think that we're Satanists.
Probably. Do they have a Satan? Are we Zorg, maybe?
I don't know. Whatever it is. Well, I think Satan is, like, their version of Satan are the bad alien spirits that make us all sick.
Okay, fair enough.
But you only learn about that once you get to level 15 and you spent like $30,000 per class. So, like, you know.
Sure.
What's worse, go into a church where everybody hails Satan and they're actually kind of nice, or going into, say, Scientology and like having Tom Cruise as your figurehead? I mean, let's be real for a second.
You can go find out more about that in our episode on Scientology. Although we do call these sort of our Halloween themed or our spooky themed episode, I actually think that every year we have spent every episode sort of debunking and unscarifying those scary things. Although sometimes we actually make them maybe more scary. Like the Salem witch trials, I think were made significantly worse by talking, like, understanding the history and talking about like zombie fungus, which preceded the Last of Us TV show.
By the way.
Yeah, I'm going to say they were inspired by us. I don't know. I'm just kidding. Obviously, the video game was in production for a long time.
We would like royalties whenever you get to them.
Yeah. But anyway, most of the time, I feel like we take what sort of sounds like a scary topic, and then we sort of demystify it a bit. And that's definitely what we're doing today. But what I missed is that this is a day of the week. It is a Wednesday, as most days
of the week are days of the week.
most of them. And today happens to be October 11th. And October 11th is, importantly, National Pet Obesity Awareness Day.
Nothing worse than a fat dog. It's also National Take Your Parents to Lunch Day, which is really wholesome. I like that.
Yeah. International Top Spinning Day.
Ooh, I like that. Tops are cool. I could totally just spin a top and stare at it for a while. It's National Fossil Day, which I think is really cool, too. I used to want to study dinosaurs when I was younger.
Yeah. Also sort of related, Take Your Parents to Lunch Day. Just kidding.
Got him.
National Emergency Nurses Day. Big supporter of that. That's awesome.
Yes. It's also National Coming Out Day. We also support that. Yay.
Yay. All the days. Bring your teddy bear to work and school day. That's so cute.
That's very, very cute. It's also National Sausage Pizza Day, which, you know, we're big fans of pizza in general. So if you can get a good vegan sausage, that's cool.
Yeah. International Day of the Girl Child. This one I had to look up because I was a little confused about what this had to do with, but it actually is this is very wholesome. Basically, the idea here is this is recognizing the struggles and the gender roles that have forced women into sort of parts of society where they have not had as many opportunities. Just recognizing and, you know, bringing attention to the fight against the injustices and inequalities faced by girls just because they were assigned that gender at birth, which I think is a great cause. So,
yep, absolutely.
Go out, fight the good fight.
100%. It's also Southern Food Heritage Day. So as a Southern boy myself, big fan of grits and biscuits and gravy and just Southern biscuits. I think I just like Southern biscuits. I think that's what it is.
There you go. Southern biscuits are very good.
Mm-hmm.
We also have a couple of things for the whole week to recognize. So this week, you know, up until now and continuing after for the rest of the week, it is Fire Prevention Week. Only you can prevent forest fires. Well,
yes, thanks.
That and some like good maintenance of forests.
Yeah, and also not doing, you know, ridiculous gender reveal parties.
Yes.
That's a good way to avoid it.
Yeah.
It's also Hospice Care Week, which I think, you know, bless those folks that work in hospice care, because that is an incredibly difficult but such an important job.
Yeah. To be clear, it's not just forest fires. Like, we want to also prevent house fires and car fires and face fires and all that sort of thing. So
yeah. Avoid setting your face on fire. Good. I think that's good advice.
Unless you are in
Rick
a
Scott?
satanic cult, yeah, that. Unless maybe you are doing it as some part of some ritual for a satanic cult that you maybe belong to, because we are talking about this spooky season. We decided we were going to go after sort of satanically themed topics. So last week we talked about left-hand path magic, and this week we're talking about Satanism as a religion, which is so much different than you might think that it would be, unless you've been paying a lot of attention to the news that has gone on around recent satanic topics.
Yes. So I think a good place to start, if you haven't listened to the Left Hand Path episode yet, would be to discuss the tenets of the Satanic Church or the Temple of Satan, or Satanism in general. So the first tenet that we're going to talk about is one should strive to act with compassion and empathy toward all creatures in accordance with reason. Beautiful.
The second is the struggle for justice is an ongoing and necessary pursuit that should prevail over laws and institutions.
Yes. The third one is one's body is inviolable, subject to one's own will alone, which I really like. Agency.
That's right. Number 4, the freedoms of others should be respected, including the freedom to offend. To willfully and unjustly encroach upon the freedoms of others is to forego one's own.
I like it. Beliefs should conform to one's best scientific understanding of the world. One should take care never to distort scientific facts to fit one's beliefs.
100%. Number 6, people are fallible. If one makes a mistake, one should do one's best to rectify it and resolve any harm that might have been caused.
And the final tenet is every tenet is a guiding principle designed to inspire nobility in action and thought. The spirit of compassion, wisdom, and justice should always prevail over the written or spoken word. Saying that out loud does not sound like it aligns with Satanism from what we understand of Satanism. So I really am glad that we are talking about these really wonderful and wholesome things.
Yeah, I think most people would hear those and not immediately think, that sounds horrible, I disagree with all of it.
Right.
And whether or not you remember this from last week, those were the tenets according to specifically the Satanic Temple, one of the most popular sort of versions of Satanism that are out there. And we'll talk about that more, because we do need to unpack a lot of the history of this. But yeah, you hear those, and I think, like I said, most people are going to say, I disagree. One's body should be violable and subject to others' wills. Or, I disagree. We should not conform to our best understanding of science. Or, justice should not prevail. Like, who's going to say that, right?
Right. I mean, there are people that do say that.
There are people,
I mean,
yes.
Yeah. I mean, Dick Cheney is for sure somebody who says that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think that's tattooed on his butt somewhere.
Yeah. His big oil baron butt. Now, the idea of Satanism is predicated on Christianity and Judaism. That is, Satan is a mythological figure inside of the Judeo-Christianity kind of belief system. So Satanism only makes sense in the context of Judeo-Christian orientations to the universe. However, some argue that the idea of Satan began with the Angra Mainyu,
I think that's right,
or Ahriman figures of Zoroastrianism.
Yeah, so on the one hand, the idea of Satan specifically is uniquely Christian, but the idea of a sort of counter force of evil has existed in many other versions of religion throughout the world, throughout time. And there are dozens or possibly even hundreds of names for Satan. There is the devil, the beast, Baphomet, Lucifer, etc. Beelzebub, yeah. There's so many. But Satan is what we'll use and focus on because this is the only name with a religion that is sort of tied to it specifically, and that is Satanism.
Yes, so the word Satan is a Hebrew word that means adversary or accuser, or one who resists, which is actually pretty apt for the Church of Satan and how people have practiced Satanism and devil worship in general.
Yes. And we want to unpack the entire history of all of the appearances of Satan in religious texts, but suffice it to say that at some point, Satan eventually became this sort of embodiment of ultimate evil. This is the archetype of what evil is, what badness is in the world is Satan. Wasn't always that way.
Yeah.
Often just depicted simply as sort of a trickster, minor godlike figure, but eventually just kept getting elevated and elevated to higher and higher status till eventually it became like the root cause and embodiment of evil in the universe.
Right. There's so many discussions about this. We're not going to be able to cover it in this particular. I mean, we are simply not a world history podcast. That's just not what we do. We're a psychology history podcast that sometimes dives into world history. And, maybe one day we'll recommend go listen to a world religions podcast about it. But
sure.
Later, Dante's Inferno and Milton's Paradise Lost treated Satan more as an anti-hero, rebelling against the authoritarianism of God. You know, like kind of like the Punisher is in the Marvel universe.
And also very much how it is depicted There's not really a Satan figure in this, so maybe I'm off on the wrong track here. But there's the series His Dark Materials, which recently got a treatment on HBO, and in that, God is largely depicted as this very strict authoritarian figure, and he's even called just the authority, basically, and really appears to be kind of a bad character in that story.
Right.
But anyway, don't want to spoil that, although I kind of already did. But anyway, still great books to go check out. Sorry.
Yeah, just a bonus recommend.
Bonus recommend. Anyway, various authors and artists depict the character of Satan in various roles. And I'm honestly, the version of Satan and anything mythological or demonic or something has been a huge inspiration for art for literally centuries now.
Right.
So you have Satan in the roles of evil as anti-hero, as granting wisdom to humans, a la Genesis in the Bible, dividing humans, responsible for critical thinking, or the bringer of suffering. There's all kinds of ways that Satan has been depicted, but there's actually no evidence whatsoever that there were actual occult groups who practiced ritualistic worship of Satan. That is, until Aleister Crowley.
Yep. So, to be fair, Aleister Crowley wasn't actually a Satanist, nor did he start or belong to a satanic church or worship of any kind at all. However, many future Satanists cite Crowley's work as inspiration for modern Satanism. So this guy is kind of like, we talked about him in the last episode in the Left Hand Path Magic one, where he talked about being the wickedest man in the world. And that's kind of where some modern forms of Satanism take a little bit of inspiration. Not all of it, but like you'll hear him being like a figure in that world.
Yeah, so really up until this point, there was no Satanism. There was no religion of Satan, there were no cult groups of Satan, there were not worshipers of Satan. There's no evidence that has ever existed, despite the Salem witch trials. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about the Satanic Panic,
right?
Particularly as it occurred in the United States in the 1980s. But real Satanism as a religion, as a form of organized group ceremony and ritual, didn't actually begin until about 1966. And this starts with Anton LaVey, born Howard Stanton Levy, I think is actually how it was originally pronounced. It may have been LaVey, but it's spelled differently. Born Howard Stanton Levy, I'm going to say, in 1930. So he was the founder and priest of the Satanic Church, which began in San Francisco, California. He pushed for the use of involvement of magic. He had a lot of supernatural ideas, and although he still didn't actually believe in Satan, as far as we can tell, he did have some, again, sort of supernatural beliefs, or at least he sort of portrayed them. And he led the church for most of his life, founding it until health problems crept up, and he eventually died in 1997 at the age of 67.
Now, in 1969, a barber who moonlighted as a spiritual medium named Herbert Sloan claimed to have started the actual first Satanist organization in 1948. He was in operation at the time that LaVey's service was operating. So you'll hear kind of, this is one of those things like, no, I was the first Satanist. With these types of histories, it's always he said, she said, kind of figuring out and really trying to dive into where these kind of underground organizations started. A lot of it's an oral history until you start getting like government involved.
Right. Yeah. So that was like sort of the big one. You had the Church of Satan in 1966. Other people have branched down to other forms of Satanism. You have the fairly popular one that people have maybe heard about called the Order of Nine Angels. They formed, again, this is sort of an occult focused and conspiracy and unfortunately very anti-Semitic satanic church. Wayne West started the first occultic Church of Man in 1971. Michael Aquino, I think it was Aquino, he was in LaVey's church, but he left the church to start a even more occult-oriented, theistic, satanistic church, which we'll talk about in a second, in 1975, and that was called the Church of Set. And so I believe he was actually some kind of military general, Michael Aquino, and he believed that the character of Satan was a misunderstanding of the Egyptian god Set, who was a leader of humans, and so he called his church the Church of Set. Anyway, there's that. The Luciferian Children of Satan in 1982 was another one. The Left Hand Path. This was an Aleister Crowley-inspired organization, started in 1990. And then the Satanic Reds in 1997.
Right, that was the baseball team.
Right, yeah. There were others. Like, those are just some of the major ones. There was actually a lot of offshoots and branches and denominations and their own little sects and all that sort of thing. Most major forms of Satanism largely reflect LaVey's original orientation to Satanism to a point. So what we should do is unpack what that Satanism is after we unleash some demonic forces upon your ears in the form of ads.
Yes!
All right, we opened Pandora's box and flooded you with the demonic spirit that was capitalism, and now we're back to talk about what Satanism actually is or was.
Yeah, and there's a lot of misconceptions, and the reason being is that there's not really a good way to discuss it, or like at least not a clean, easy to fit in a box type of way.
Yeah.
So let's start to unpack with Dr. Jesper Aargaard. I'm going to say Aargaard.
I think that's right.
Dr. Jesper Aargaard Peterson was a satanic scholar who wrote that, quote, contemporary religious Satanism spans the field from full-blown religion with tradition, rituals, communitarian ethos, and hierarchy to austere, individualistic philosophy, end quote. And Dr. Jenny Reichert and Dr. James Richardson describe Satanism as, quote, decentralized subculture. So you've got kind of two different discussions here where part of it is this is an actual religious practice. It's got ceremony, it's got like, rules, tenets and all that. And you've got other people saying, it's actually just kind of a subculture that is not really formed around a singular point.
Yeah, it spans the gamut. Like, you have everything from things that look pretty identical to what you might expect in a church to almost anarchy level, like disorganization.
Yes.
It could be a lot of things, basically. You could sort of think of there being Satanism as two sort of general types of Satanism, even though, we talked about there is all what Satanism is spans the huge gamut. You could sort of lump them into theistic, which is also called esoteric Satanism, and atheistic or rational Satanism.
Right. So this theistic Satanism is kind of the magical thinking that we talked about, especially in the left-hand path magic stuff that we were kind of discussing.
Right.
That essentially follows religious tradition and believing in a power of divine beings, choosing specifically to worship the being of Satan. Now, this is, to be clear about that, like when they are in the space of talking about this could be the Christian Satan or some other version of Satan or imagining of what that being is. The thing about this is it's not necessarily that they're worshiping evil. It's that they have it's kind of the same thing where there's always two sides to a story, and they're kind of giving, sometimes they'll give Satan the charitable side of the story to be like, he was wronged. He is actually not doing anything wrong. He was actually doing something right by, questioning the answer. And there's a lot of kind of discussions around, they're not worshiping evil per se. They're worshiping a side of the discussion, but the Order of the Nine Angels, which is a theistic satanic group, not so great. And they've totally bastardized that as well. So it's really important to know that like each of these denominations kind of look at this in a different way.
Yeah, they have their own orientation. It's part of why there's so many of them.
Right.
Because they all have their own individual interpretations. They're not really based on anything specific. They kind of just made it up. And for those theistic ones, this is probably the closest to what people believed all Satanism was during the Satanic Panic in the United States and other countries during the 1980s. Although not really, though, because even then, that version of theistic Satanism did not kill and eat people and engage in all these weird sexual things that they did. Even if they sometimes did believe in animal sacrifice and the militaristic ruling of humans, as was the case with the Order of Nine Angels, at least with the militaristic ruling part.
Yeah.
The theistic Satanism, which was not the most common at all, but that was probably the version that was the closest to what people feared as being Satan, because these were people who did believe in divinity. They did believe in godlike figures. They did believe in like an otherworldly sort of presence. And the one they chose to follow was Satan. As you said, it usually was not because of the idea of it being evil, but they nevertheless did believe in magical, supernatural sorts of things.
Right. But this brings us to the conversation around atheistic Satanism, which seems to represent the most popular approach to Satanism in general. And I think this is one of those things where naming creates a unique problem. I mean, we did a whole episode on names, but the calling atheistic Satanism in general already has a connotation that goes along with it. But the atheistic Satanism, the tenets that we listed from the Satanic Temple at the beginning of this episode, that's part of atheistic Satanism. More than anything, it is a rejection of all theistic beliefs. They don't actually worship Satan or any supposedly deistic being. So they don't really there's no divinity in this. It's rationale. It's treating humans with kindness and compassion. It's believing in science more than anything.
Yeah, they don't believe that there's a God. They don't believe that there's Satan. They don't believe there's angels. They don't believe there's demons. They don't believe in magic. That's atheistic Satanism. And also called rational Satanism. And the rational Satanists did deviate from LaVey's form of Satanism, his Satanists, because of his emphasis on magic and the supernatural. Even though he really was more atheistic than anything, he still included a lot of the sort of supernatural and magical components to his sort of ritualistic, worship, whatever it was that he did. And they also felt that his church was too authoritarian. So the Satanic Temple is really not a continuation of the Church of Satan that LaVey started. It was really its own thing, skewing even further toward atheism. And I think you could really say humanism more than anything.
Right.
And being very largely in favor of just a scientific understanding of the world, but wearing a big felony costume, which was calling themselves satanic to do it.
I would love to know how Carl Rogers would feel about the Temple of Satan being the humanistic approach, really. I mean, it's a very humankind, community-based, supporting one another and being good to each other. And so I wonder how we'd feel about you comparing humanism to Satanism, just on the surface,
Yeah.
So this form of Satanism, this atheistic Satanism, is a flashier, more ostentatious way of being non-religious. It gives you a label to be non-religious and belong to a group where you can be non-religious without actively calling yourself an atheist.
Right.
Though I feel like you get less ire by calling yourself an atheist than a Satanist. So I don't know,
more ostentatious.
Yeah, just some stuff to think about.
Yeah.
But they state clearly that, quote, "We bow to no god or gods and celebrate our outsider status. To embrace the name Satan is to embrace rational inquiry, removed from supernaturalism and archaic tradition-based superstitions. The Satanist should actively work to hone critical thinking and exercise rational inquiry in all things. Our beliefs must be malleable to the best current scientific understandings of the material world, never the reverse." End quote. So that sounds really, really great. It also sounds like there's a part of this group that likes to kind of egg people on.
Yeah.
And we'll maybe kind of unpack that a little bit as we go too.
We will talk about that, but there is a bit of poking the bear that sort of goes on with this.
Yeah.
But it is also clear from that statement that this is a group that is not about elevating a sort of an authoritarian figure at all. It is a much more sort of communal group. They go on to add, quote, "Satan is symbolic of the eternal rebel in opposition to arbitrary authority, forever defending individual sovereignty even in the face of insurmountable odds. Satan is an icon for the unbowed will of the relentless inquirer, the heretic who questions sacred laws and rejects all tyrannical impositions. He is a symbol of defiance, independence, wisdom, and self-empowerment," end quote. So again, just there's really even no need to unpack that further. They say it really, really clearly here that this is really all about individual liberty and freedom to question things, to find your path towards truth, to reject arbitrary authorities, that sort of thing.
Right. And so on paper, that sounds great. But let's look at what this looks like in practice. So the atheistic Satanists, they largely organize a group of like-minded people to do a couple things. First, they provide a community for non-religious people. They fundraise for humanist charities, and they advocate for bodily autonomy. So right now, if you want to look into some of the work they're doing, they're donating a lot of money and helping develop legislation and stuff around abortion rights and women's health care specifically, because they believe that bodily autonomy is the right of all peoples.
As well as paying for shelters for kids and other people who have become unhoused. Lots of charitable and humanistic giving. I think they have participated in food drives to help get a lot of food together for people who maybe became unhoused because of a national emergency or some kind of environmental disaster of some sort.
Right.
They also engage in specific organized activities to expose and debunk pseudosciences and conspiracy theories.
Love that.
They have advocated for and actually been able to get legislation to abolish the use of corporal punishment in various institutions.
Great.
And advocated generally for the protection of children and laws against abuses of children. And they also have really organized for what they call true religious freedom and pushing for the separation of church and state.
Yes. So separation of church and state, this is a big deal. And we are going to unpack that. But first, what we're going to do is we're going to separate ourselves from the ads that you're going to listen to.
All right, so this last point on separation of church and state, it warrants a somewhat deep dive. It's obviously not a whole episode length, but it got to be a chunk of this, as this explanation is arguably one of the most central arguments that the Satanic Temple makes and one of the most central roles that they actually play. So what is the separation of church and state, and why is it important here?
Right. So the Satanic Temple seems to see the utility of their existence in the highlighting of double standards and abuse of power by more commonly accepted religious organizations. So, for instance, many after-school programs are organized by Christian groups that push their religious agenda on kids who are invited to participate. So the kids that go, they get to hear a lot of stuff from the Bible and maybe a particular religious denomination. In response, the Satanic Temple might push to add satanic after-school programs to demonstrate how inappropriate it is to push religious activities on the kids. That actually specifically happened in Florida, and they got it approved, by the way.
Yeah, that happened. The government cannot specifically favor one religious group over another. It's in the First Amendment of our Constitution, by the way.
Yes.
Which we're going to get back to in a second. Now, famously, this is where many people may have heard this, but this is one of the fun parts of this. In 2016, a privately donated monument of the Ten Commandments was erected at the state capitol in Arkansas. The First Amendment of the Constitution, as I was saying, it states that, I'm going to quote it directly here, just in case all of y'all who like to claim the Constitution and have no idea at all what it actually says. But here's the First Amendment for you. And I mean, honestly, anybody, you got to have a refresher.
Yeah.
Quote, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances, end quote. So essentially you have a few things in there, but the government cannot specifically show favoritism for one religious or religious organization over another, and must protect people's ability to engage in free speech.
Yes. So what makes this important is that this particular religious monument is on property and is part of a government building specific to the state of Arkansas, right? So what the Satanic Temple has done is, because they are officially recognized as a religion, they offered a similarly privately donated, non-offensive statue of Baphomet. It's not lewd, it's not lascivious, it's actually like pretty tasteful, to go alongside the Ten Commandments monument. So for those of you who've never seen it, the Ten Commandments monument, it looks like kind of a tombstone. It does, which has two tablets that Moses came with, because Moses was the one that read out the commandments, right? He's the one that showed up with the tablets, and he's like, here are your new rules. And then it has all of the commandments listed on it, so it's a very religious thing. But if you look at the donated Baphomet monument, it is Baphomet, which, if you're not familiar, has a human body, goat legs, goat head, angel wings. And this particular monument, he is not wearing a shirt, but he is wearing like some type of robe to cover his lower half. There are two children looking up at him. There is a pentagram on what looks like to be a tombstone behind him.
Yep.
And, there's the eternal flame on top of his head. There's all kinds of imagery. And it's actually a really well done.
It's impressive
monument. Arguably, both of them are very well done, but I think the Baphomet one is a little bit better done. But that's just maybe my personal bias.
The detail in it is pretty exquisite.
Yeah.
Like, it is a significantly more intricate piece than the Ten Commandments, which is artistic. It does look nice. But the detail in the Baphomet statue is remarkable, I think.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
Okay, so yes, they basically offered, like, okay, if you get to put up this 10 Commandments, then we get to put up the statue of Baphomet because we're a recognized religion. The offering that they made to put up their privately donated Baphomet statue was, quote, hell no, end quote, from the government of Arkansas.
Yeah.
And so the Satanic Temple, along with a few other religious freedom organizations, took the state to court.
Right. And so they suggested that either they both exist on the Capitol or the Ten Commandments is removed and Baphomet remains for as long as the Ten Commandments were in place and is then removed. And so right now the hearings are kind of ongoing. They haven't decided anything yet. But I think one of the most important things to unpack within this is going back to that First Amendment, but also recognizing that in the United States, because, for those folks that are listening outside of the United States, this is a weird thing that comes up all the time. But the truth is the United States does not have an official religion.
Right.
And so many people think that the United States has an official religion and an official language, which we have neither of.
Right.
So English is not the official language of the United States. The official language is whatever it is you speak. The official practice of religion is whatever it is you practice. That's part of what established this country. It makes it kind of unique to other places. So that's why this is such a unique kind of argument to unpack and why there's so many debates around it, even though there really shouldn't be.
I saw a bumper sticker the other day I really liked. It said, it's a free country, speak whatever language you want.
I love that.
Isn't that great?
That's so great.
So on sort of a personal note, I'm looking at this Ten Commandments monument and thinking this is a grossly offensive to any non-Christian person.
Right.
Whether they belong to a religious organization or not. Because that's basically saying this system of law, this is at the state capitol, by the way. So this is someone who is a citizen who maybe doesn't have a religion going and saying, I am not represented by this government.
Right.
Or someone who belongs to, let's say, Hinduism, saying even if they were born in the United States, but they follow a Hindu religion, I am not being recognized by this government. Or someone who follows, pick any religion you want, that basically the government is saying this is the religion we endorse. And so the Satanists sort of regard themselves as a poison pill against religious power in the federal and state governments. And this, again, the separation of church and state. They do this by relying on the fact that in the United States, religion and the lack thereof is protected by foundational governing laws that prohibit religious discrimination in this country.
Right.
If one religion can have government representation in prayer, activities, monuments, organizations, and laws, then any religion can have the same representation in prayer, activities, monuments, organizations, and laws. Presumably, most people don't want all religions having a say in their government and laws. Otherwise, we wouldn't live in a freeish country because religious doctrine often conflicts directly with the prescription of many laws. And so, if we don't want to live in a country that is governed by 1,000 different religions, then we have to say we don't get to endorse any religion, and that's why you have separation of church and state.
Right.
It's because open the door for one, opens the door for all. And there's the non-religious people certainly don't want this, but even every other religion does not want the other religions they don't believe to then tell them how they can and can't practice their faith.
Right.
It is a can of worms that we do not want to and do not need to open.
Yes, the central purpose of establishing a separation of church and state as a general rule is to prevent a theocracy.
Right.
However we got here and started, when the Pilgrims got here and they wanted to have more restrictive religious practices, because that's how that started.
Right.
The truth is the founding of the nation of the United States was designed to prevent a theocracy, which if you pay attention to politics right now, we are slowly moving towards. I don't know if y'all know that, but go ahead and pay attention to some of that stuff and you will find that we are moving towards a theocratic type of government system, which is bad for a lot of people. That's why specifically the separation of church and state is such an important thing. Does that mean that there shouldn't be representation of religion within government or at least those folks that practice? What we're saying is laws should not be based on religion, not necessarily representation. We need representation because it does take all voices to create a community that is pro-social and helpful, but it should not be governed by a single religion. That is not ever going to last.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that is always the trick, is that or not the trick, but the sort of complexity and nuance of the whole thing is that you're exactly right. We have to have representation because those are people who participate in the society. But we don't make laws based on that religion that force people to adhere to the tenets of that religion. We don't show favoritism to one religion over another, but we do give those people a voice. They have to have one. Otherwise, we can't be a democracy.
Right.
And we don't want any kind of autocracy, theocracy or otherwise. We do not want authoritarian government. That is bad. We've seen that experiment. It sucks.
It sucks a lot.
Authoritarianism, bad. Always, forever, everywhere, bad. We don't want it.
Yeah, we've seen it replicated enough times to know.
Yes. How many times do you need to get cancer before you realize that getting cancer is bad?
Right. Exactly.
Authoritarianism is cancer.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. I think it's important, though, that I think, do take the pun intended devil's advocate position here and consider why people choose to go this route. If their orientation is non-religious, atheistic, why bother embracing the idea and identity of Satan that is so culturally loaded and embedded with so much meaning? Because it looks antagonistic, right?
I think there is a question to unpack within this where it might seem like this group of people are being trolls. And so let's unpack that. Like, are they just trolling governments and trolling religious people? Are they just trying to upset people?
Yeah, kind of, in a way. They are being deliberately antagonistic, but in a way that legally is established so that they can get results, right? They believe in their message, in their position, in their tactics, and in their values, which I think is fundamentally different from trolls who almost by definition don't believe in their message. They don't believe in their position. They really don't believe in their tactics or values. They are just antagonistic for the sake of being antagonistic. So in a way, it's being trolling, but it's not the same as people who are just being trolls to be trolls. And I'm saying the word trolls a lot, but I think what I'm trying to say is they're not trying to stir the pot and cause like problems because it's fun to stir the pot and cause problems. They chose this position because it gives them the actual power to be effective.
Yeah, it's a form of nonviolent resistance that allows for progressive change.
Yeah, there you go.
It is important. Yes, it can be confrontational. Yes, it is challenging people. Yes, it is upsetting, I'm sure, a lot of people when they hear that Baphomet is going to be put in front of the Arkansas state capitol. I understand why people would be upset about that, but the truth is the law allows for that, and the law is set up to protect for that, for those particular freedoms. And I think that this is a really great nonviolent resistance way to hold those people, those lawmakers, those people that are in power, hold them accountable to the laws that they're writing.
Yeah. Now, I think for the theistic Satanists, that whole approach is just magical thinking, like any other superstition or conspiracy theory or like that orientation. But for both theistic and atheistic Satanists, the invocation of the character of Satan is symbolic.
Right.
They get attention, a lot of attention, for adopting this sort of radically iconoclast figurehead, and they get a social community of people who encourage their behavior and beliefs. They get a sense of correspondence with how they interpret the meaning of their figure and their values and their worldviews. So that's something they do share. So I sort of go into the Venn diagram here of like theistic and atheistic Satanists and what they have in common. The theistic, again, magical thinking, conspiracy theories, but theistic and atheistic, they do adopt this idea of Satan because of the role of counterculture, if you will.
Right. Having a figurehead who is like symbolic in their beliefs is nice to kind of bring about somewhere that these organizations can like bring people's attention to and focus on. Like you go, okay, like, by the way, Satan, okay, now listen to what I've got to say. And then like, you start kind of getting that discussion going. But
right,
as I was kind of reading the notes about this, I was really curious, what does iconoclast mean?
Iconoclast, I have sort of always taken to mean someone who opposes sort of traditions in a way, but the actual definition is a little more specific as someone who attacks cherished beliefs or institutions, often want destroying or very critically evaluating images used in religious worship. So iconoclast is someone who essentially breaks down sort of traditions and sort of those cherished beliefs, but maybe does so specifically with respect to religion.
Right. Okay. I like it.
Okay, so we talked about the theistic Satanists, the theistic and atheistic, what they have in common. But for where atheistic Satanists are different is their approach to Satanism is a means to an end. One that looks cool, it allows them to be recognized in stark contrast with their opponents. When they see bigotry in other organized religions, they adopt strong positions of inclusion and tolerance. When they see favoritism for one religion over another, they step in and demand the same to create equality and liberty. That's sort of where their role is like they don't see Satanism as worship of any kind of deity figure. It is an organized group of people who are fighting for what they believe to be freedom and the appropriate separation of church and state.
Right. Like on paper, it's a social justice movement.
I think in functionality, it's a social.
It's functionality,
it's a religion, but functionality is a social.
Sorry,
justice movement,
there you go. That's fair. That's more what I meant. Yeah. If they're being recognized as an organization that lends them legal legitimacy, they're able to do a lot more. You know, like if I'm sitting back and I'm not like a legal entity or anything, it just looks like I'm complaining. So in a way, what we're talking about is this group is a form of protesting, except that they have legal backing and they have funding and they have tax exemption status because they are a religion.
Yeah.
And they're not just standing on the side of the road with homemade signs and a megaphone. Not that type of protest isn't valuable, but they have a different type of...
Yeah, it's just a different way.
They have a leg up being able to walk into a space and being like, these are my rights very clearly based on the First Amendment. So let's go ahead and change some things. So they're able to jump into that stuff. They can create legal woes for those folks that are trying to discriminate against other religions or create bigoted legal practices. And so I think that in itself is one of the most important functions of a religion who is designed, or an organization, a religious practice or an organization that is actively designed to disrupt.
Right.
And disrupt systems of injustice.
And then they can help start those, what they are sort of the counterpoint, but equivalent services to combat what they see as that injustice, the sort of corresponding programs, but with the satanic label as opposed to the Christian label.
Right.
The satanic message as opposed to the Christian message. And so, I feel like you hear all of this. I'd be curious to know what people think. Like, do you feel like you are a Satanist at the end of this? And, I think you don't have to agree with us or with them. The purpose of this was just to explore what Satanism is. Like that was the point of this discussion. I don't think I would call myself a Satanist explicitly because I don't like belonging to a labeled group.
Sure.
But I mean, it's hard to hear their position and disagree with it. Like, I agree with the separation of church and state. I agree with people's individual bodily autonomy. I agree with like humanistic values that serve and help lift people up when people are down. Like, that message is one that I think is hard to hear and disagree with. And by the way, like I sort of criticized capitalism in here, but like the Satanic Temple makes no explicit points on capitalism, arguably because it is so individual, like oriented in terms of like individual self-empowerment, that sort of thing. It almost sounds libertarian in a way, which is obviously very pro-capitalism. So they make no statement about it either way, but I wanted to communicate, as effectively as I could. And I just think it's hard to hear their message and say like, that is an evil organization and we should crush them. Like I who walks away with that conclusion? Certainly somebody does. Sure. But, I feel like I wouldn't call myself a Satanist, but I do agree with a lot of the positions that they've taken.
I'm in the same boat with you where I don't know that I would say that I'm explicitly a Satanist, but I do have a hard time arguing against those tenets. I do see why people might have a hard time with the label. And I do see that just like any sort of human organization, that there are problems and things can happen and it can go wrong and there are agendas. Like, it's very important to understand that nuanced discussion as well.
Yeah.
I think unpacking all of it, though, and when you really get down to the brass tacks of this particular thing, you start realizing that, it's not this scary thing that people make it out to be. And I think that's arguably what we were setting out to do here, is like describe this thing and say it's not some evil church that's sacrificing humans and eating children and doing the things that you think it's doing. It's absolutely just a legal entity that is part of the religious freedoms of the United States and is doing different types of work that are having impact on policy and law. So I don't know. I think it's fascinating more than anything.
Sure. Yeah. One thing that sort of occurred to me as you were speaking through that as well is part of the other reason I think that I wouldn't want to take up that position again, even though I agree with much of what they have to say, is they have sort of, in calling themselves Satanists and because they see it as the opponent, right? They sort of like looked at the name of Satan meaning the adversary.
Right.
And basically what that means is they're saying, we're coming out as a group to be your enemy. And they're pointing at, the most popular religious group in the country. And where I think my position is like, I don't want any enemies. I want to figure out where I can build alliances. I do understand their point, but like, that's like my position is like, I'm not trying to.
There's a place for it.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's a place for it, but I'm not trying to make enemies right out the gate. I'd want to build alliances and see where we can find common ground. But again, that's my position. That doesn't have to be theirs. I actually appreciate a lot of what their successes they've been able to get from their approach.
Yeah, and they'll respect you for it because that's your your personal choice.
Yes, exactly. Whereas other religious organizations might not respect me for it.
Right. Exactly. That's my
personal
point.
choice.
Exactly.
Well, something we like to do, if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. I didn't give any of the spiel I normally give about supporting us and all that at the top of this, and that's fine. We'll just do it at the end. Thank you for being here with us. I hope that you made it through. I hope that we were able to satisfy some amount of curiosity that you may have had about Satanism, whether you disagree with them or us. And like I said, I'm not really taking a major position, just saying that I do agree with some of the things that they have to say. One thing that we like to do is give recommendations, but first acknowledge the people that help make this show happen, which is the people who've joined us on Patreon. By joining us, they get all these other perks and benefits that you, a listener, if you're not on Patreon, you're not getting. You're not getting early episodes. You're not getting notes of episodes. You're not getting behind the scene content, and you could be. And you just go over to Patreon. You join this lovely group of humans that includes Mike M, Megan, Layla, Mike T, Justin, Kim, Joshua, Brad, Stephanie, Olivia, Brian, and Ashley. Thank you all so much.
Yes.
And you, listener, could be a part of that crew if you would like. And I'll read your name. You could tell me not to. I don't have to read your name if you don't want me to.
And that's fine.
There's also my team of people who help make this happen, which is Justin Greenhouse, who does the editing and production on this. Shane, thank you so much for recording with me and being my co-host on everything.
Of course.
Social media coordinator is Emma Wilson. There are other ways you can support us if you don't want to join us on Patreon. You can just tell someone about us. That's cool. You can leave us a rating and review, subscribe. You can pick up some merch at our merch store. We've got all kinds of goodies over there. And I think that is it before we get to recommendations. Am I missing anything, or is there anything you'd like to add, Shane, before we recommend some things?
I think that covers all the things.
Okay, cool. Well, we're going to get to our recommendations then after we get to an ad break. Okay, so one of the most fun things that we get to do every week is that we get to recommend some things. Sometimes they're things, sometimes they're activities, sometimes they're just ideas. But either way, it's recommendations that we have.
Yay!
Recommendations. Today, I am recommending a documentary. Now, usually our recommendations are like wholly divorced from the topic at hand. We just,
yes.
There's like just a thing. Like whatever we were talked about, it doesn't matter. We just give some other unrelated recommendation. But because this was both a source for this particular episode and relevant to the topic, and I would recommend it to people, it is on topic with today's episode. And this is a documentary called Hail Satan. And I say it like that because there is a question mark at the end. And so this is a documentary filmmaker who basically followed the Satanic Temple around, and particularly the controversy around Baphomet and the Ten Commandment statues in Arkansas. It's not very long. I think the documentarian does a pretty good job of just giving everyone different voices in this and just letting them sort of tell the story. I don't think the documentarian is a Satanist, but I think she was curious about learning about it. Her name, by the way, is adorably Penny Lane.
Oh, I love that.
Is the documentary filmmaker here. It's available in various places, but go check it out if you're curious. Hail Satan is the documentary.
That's so great. Penny Lane is one of my favorite Beatles songs. Like, it's such a great song. Oh, yeah. So good. Mine is wholly divorced from this series, but I mean, I guess there's religion in it if you consider Jedi religion.
Some people do.
Some people do. My recommendation is the new show that is out that is part of the Star Wars Expanded Universe, which is Ahsoka. Have you started watching it at all?
I haven't, but I've been wanting to. It looks amazing.
It is incredible. Ray Stevenson as this character, and it is like, I won't spoil anything for anybody, but it is such a great addition to the current Star Wars lore. Because for those of you who don't know, when Disney bought Star Wars, they pretty much eliminated all of the extra books that existed. And like, so there was this whole extended universe that was out. Like now they call it the Legends universe. And there's all these really great stories and really great characters that no longer exist in canon. And so these shows, you know, when you have like Obi-Wan Kenobi and you have Ahsoka coming out, they're extending that canon. And it's just more Star Wars and more nuanced discussions. I mean, Ahsoka is played by Rosario Dawson, and she is a gray Jedi. She is not light side or dark side. She is somewhere in between. She is balanced in the light, is what they say. Man, they just do. The set pieces are good. The fights are so good. The story is so cool. The stuff they've added to this universe is. It's just a really good time to be a Star Wars fan, is what I would say.
That's awesome.
And this is such a good addition to that world.
I've heard really good, really high praise for this show, so I'm very excited to check it out. I appreciate the recommendation.
Yeah.
I've been following your recommendations more and more lately, as it were. I'm looking forward to checking that one out. I appreciate it.
I love it.
All right. Thank you very much for being here. We appreciate you. If you'd like to tell us about your documentary or TV show recommendations, or if you'd like to comment on anything that we said about Satanism or the various histories of Satanism or things that we made in our own commentary about Satanism, we'd love to hear from you. Please be kind and we will respond to you. Otherwise, we'll just ignore you. You can reach out to us directly by emailing us at info@wwd.podcast.com, or you can reach out to us on the social media platforms and we'll get back to you there. I do look forward to hearing from all of you, so if you haven't written in before and you'd like to, do it. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
We get a lot of suggestions for episode topics and we take those into consideration. Sometimes they have inspired topics, but mostly what we're looking for is people to give us feedback on episodes. Like, we'd like to have some engagement around the content that we've created, because that's where we feel like we could use an opportunity to further the discussion and add other people's voices to subsequent episodes where we'll say, hey, this is what someone else said about this thing that we talked about earlier.
Right.
So reach out to us. Otherwise, you can, as I said, leave a rating or review, leave a comment. We have a lot of people who will get upset about like one little thing, offhand comment we made, and then leave us a low star rating review, which is not my favorite thing. So if you do like this, go give us 5 stars. It'll be great and really help to assuage those like one-off comment things that end up with a very low star rating for some people.
Yeah.
To be fair, I mean, I think we're still at like 4.5 stars or something, but just
we're doing
4,
good.
But
every now and again we get somebody who clearly misunderstands what we're saying.
Yeah, or just completely disagrees with us, like Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, that's true.
That's out there. All right, I think that's all that I have to say. Anything you have to add before we let everyone go?
Nope, that's all I got.
Perfect, then this is Abraham.
And this is Shane.
Hail Satan!
Hail Satan, see ya!
You've been listening to Why We Do What We Do. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to www.wwdpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have an awesome day.